Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. There are places in the galaxy where even the Tyranids, vast, star-spanning superorganisms engineered for unrelenting consumption, will not go. These systems, silent and untouched amid carnage, hang like unblinking eyes in the void. They are not defended by mighty fleets, nor do they shine with holy light. Yet hive fleets twist and writhe away from them, as if repelled by something deeper than instinct. For a species that does not know fear, these places seem to inspire something worse: avoidance without understanding. Something the hive mind cannot subsume, cannot decode, cannot devour. A black hesitation in its otherwise perfect hunger. To understand how deeply unsettling it is for the Tyranids to bypass a system, we first have to appreciate the sheer mechanical inevitability of their hunger. The Tyranids do not merely conquer, they unmake. They don't wage war in the sense we know. They reduce resistance to a biochemical obstacle and sweep it aside with overwhelming force. Every part of their existence is designed for relentless expansion, driven by the will of the hive mind, an unfathomable consciousness that connects every bioform like neurons in a star-spanning brain. To them, planets are not strategic assets. They are food, resources, biofuel. The idea of avoiding something runs counter to the very essence of their being. They don't hesitate. They don't fear, they don't reason in the way other species do. They are hunger made flesh, the final argument in a galaxy of violence. Tyranids are a closed-loop perfection of biological purpose, evolution weaponized. From the smallest ripper to the vast Norn queens, they serve a singular goal: consume, digest, and repurpose all biomass into more of themselves. Their fleets stretch across voids, guided not by commanders but by psychic currents that bind every living organism into a single mind. This is what makes the anomaly so terrifying. The hive fleets don't just pass by certain systems, they avoid them in a way that feels deliberate, almost desperate. When a hive fleet approaches one of these forbidden stars, its tendrils split unnaturally, forming convoluted arcs around a seemingly dead world. The psychic pressure of the hive mind flickers, its relentless song falters, and the invasion simply never comes. No explanation is offered, because none can be. The Imperium's best minds, magi biologists, inquisitors, even radical rogue traders, are left staring at the void, trying to understand what could make the galaxy's most terrifying force swerve. Unlike chaos, which thrives on contradiction and madness, Tyranids represent a brutal form of logic. They do not turn back because they are deceived or seduced. They turn back because something has instructed them to. Something even the hive mind acknowledges. That implies one of two things, both equally horrifying. Either the hive mind is not as omnipotent as it appears, or it recognizes a threat greater than itself. Every documented Tyranid assault follows the same pattern. Their scouts, vanguard organisms like lictors and genostealers, precede the main force, infiltrating and destabilizing prey worlds. Once the psychic taste of life is confirmed, the swarm descends. Orbital defenses crumble, populations vanish into digestive pools, and the skies blacken with spores. But in these avoided systems, no lictors are seen, no scouts, nothing. It's as if the Tyranids have blind spots in their omnidirectional gaze, places they refuse even to look. And this refusal is consistent across fleets. Hive fleet behemoth, Kraken, Leviathan, Jormungandr, each one, when encountering these particular systems, either changes course or splinters. Some even go dark entirely. The Adeptus Mechanicus, obsessed with patterns, has charted these deviations and found them disturbingly precise. These aren't random anomalies. They are voids in the map of consumption, wounds in the psyche of the galaxy where hunger falters. The psychological implications ripple across the Imperium. To soldiers on the front lines, the Tyranids are death incarnate, unstoppable, emotionless, consuming. To hear that they can be repelled not by weapons or wards but by something unknown plants the seed of dread. What lurks in those systems? What echoes in the warp so deeply that it can silence a predator made from nightmares? What possible phenomenon, psychic, technological, or divine, could cause an empire of biological precision to veer away? Some tech priests argue it's an emergent behavior, a higher-order form of avoidance, like a neural net detecting hazardous inputs. Others believe it's a flaw in the hive mind, a kind of blind spot caused by its own architecture. But these are theories born from ignorance, desperate attempts to explain the inexplicable with models of logic. The truth is, the hive mind doesn't explain itself. It doesn't need to. It moves like a storm, and storms do not answer questions. That silence, that refusal to answer, is the most unsettling part. For all their alien nature, Tyranids are reliable in their terror. But the existence of these untouched systems suggests something else, an awareness, perhaps even a memory, buried in the hive mind's collective soul. If such a thing exists, maybe it is something older than fear, a signal, a scent, a shape in the dark that tells even the most ravenous of creatures to turn back. The Tyranids are not merely monsters. They are a measure of what is possible when life becomes weapon. That they pause, that they choose not to feed, should chill every heart in the galaxy. Because it means something waits in those places. And whatever it is, even the Great Devourer does not dare to touch it. In the endless archives of the Adeptus Mechanicus, far beyond what the average citizen or even most Imperial commanders will ever see, there are star maps stained with red ink and machine oil tears. These are no ordinary stellar charts. They bear annotations in Binheric script, cryptic designations like Zone Null or Prime Exception, and coordinates deliberately fragmented across sublayers of cogitator encryption. What these maps show, in cold, mechanical certainty, are the paths the Tyranids did not take. Lines of advance that twist away from seemingly ordinary systems, again and again, across multiple sectors, over decades. This is not superstition or battlefield myth. This is cold, hard data, gathered by generations of tech adepts who noticed something deeply wrong with the predictive models. The earliest instance comes from Hive Fleet Behemoth's initial plunge into the galaxy. While the broader Imperium fixated on the siege of Macragge, a few Magi noticed something strange. An entire planetary cluster near the fleet's advance was entirely untouched. Not raided, not bypassed, not ignored due to lack of biomass. Simply avoided. Later fleets, Kraken with its probing tendrils and Leviathan with its bifurcated assault through both galactic poles, repeated this behavior. Different sectors, same anomalies. The patterns were irregular in shape, but disturbingly consistent in outcome. Like burn marks on parchment, these zones refused to be digested. The Tyranids approached, then curved around them like water avoiding oil. A map of Hive Fleet Jormungandr's movements shows a perfect spiral through the Segmentum Tempestus, yet right in the center, 3 systems lie untouched, despite their proximity and value. These are not insignificant worlds. Some are agri-planets with teeming populations. Others are mineral-rich mining hubs. All are viable for consumption. And yet, the Hive fleets never touched them. The Mechanicus began tracking these anomalies more rigorously after the devastation wrought by Hive Fleet Hydra, which moved erratically through the galactic fringe. While seemingly random in direction, its tendrils still kinked away from certain stars. The Inquisition's Ordo Xenos, ever suspicious, quietly began their own mapping projects. The result? A cross-sector comparison showing that the same systems, or at least systems bearing certain characteristics, are repeatedly avoided. Even more disturbing was the discovery that some of these systems had previously seen Genestealer cult activity, meaning the Tyranid vanguard had been there, had seeded it, had prepared it for harvest, and then the Hive fleet never came. In these cases, the cults degenerated. Devoid of purpose, they collapsed into madness, turning on themselves or trying to summon their gods through mass sacrifice. The psychic signal of the cults remained strong, yet the hive mind never answered. This contradiction sent shockwaves through the Adeptus Mechanicus. Cult behavior was assumed to be an unerring signal, like a flare calling down the devourer. But clearly, the hive mind can resist the call. It can override its own design. The implication is profound. It means the Tyranids are not bound purely by hunger. There is a higher logic at play, a form of decision-making beyond comprehension. The greatest insight came from data intercepted by rogue traders operating in the halo stars. These border regions, often lawless and filled with stellar anomalies, showed similar patterns. Tyranid splinters that entered certain dead sectors simply vanished. No warp signatures, no biosigns, nothing. In some cases, astropathic messages caught moments before signal collapse recorded desperate warnings. Psychic storms of such intensity that even the Gestalt song of the hive mind broke apart. The patterns form a kind of negative cartography, a map of where Tyranids will not go, traced by absence. Tech priests began overlaying these patterns with known Necron tomb locations, ancient warp storms, and other Xenos anomalies. The results were inconclusive, yet provocative. In a few cases, the avoided systems matched forgotten entries in long-dead explorer logs. These places were marked with cryptic phrases like "Void Sea," "Still Dreaming," or "Do Not Return." But some patterns defy logic entirely. In the galactic north, near the ruins of the Cadian Gate, 3 dead systems sit in a straight line, all avoided by hive fleets from different origins. The systems are lifeless. No planets remain, just asteroids and dust. And yet, the Tyranids swerve around them like they're infected with cosmic plague. Perhaps the most chilling instance occurred with Hive Fleet Naga, whose splinter tendrils crept through the ghoul stars. When one such tendril approached the system, designated Epsilon Lantris, it began to dissolve, not in battle but as if breaking apart from within. Bioforms simply died. Mycetic spores fell inert. Lictors began consuming each other. The synaptic network collapsed, and the system was left untouched. Mago-Cybernetica studying the aftermath could find no pathogen, no technological defense, no cause. Just an echo in the warp. A low hum, like something breathing in the dark. Whatever the truth is, it is clear that the Tyranids are not omnipotent. They follow patterns, and sometimes those patterns break. Not due to resistance, but to something they will not face. Something we do not yet understand, but that they, in their ancient, galaxy-spanning experience, do. And that should terrify us all. There's an old saying among the more esoteric branches of the Ordo Xenos: the only thing that hunts the hunter is silence. It speaks to a deeply unsettling possibility that something even more predatory than the Tyranids stalks the void. The Imperium, vast and fragmented though it is, has always seen the Great Devourer as the apex threat, an enemy that cannot be reasoned with, bargained with, or even fully comprehended. Yet, what if there are regions of the galaxy where the Tyranids themselves become prey? It's not just that they avoid certain systems. It's that some of their tendrils seem to vanish entirely after entering them. Hive Fleet Ouroboros, already a strange anomaly due to its looping, self-consuming nature, reportedly sent a splinter toward a quiet system beyond the Ultima Segmentum. What returned was not a splinter fleet, but fragmented astropathic screams from the nearby sector. These echoes carried garbled images, flashes of tendrils convulsing in space, synapse creatures burning from within, and a sensation, untranslatable, of being watched. We like to think of Tyranids as the hunters, but what happens when the predator meets something that has no interest in running? Some inquisitors believe these dead zones are not traps or defenses, but hunting grounds. That something waits in those stars, still and ancient, until a Tyranid fleet dares to cross the line. Then it strikes, not with guns or claws, but with annihilation. Total erasure. No debris, no drifting bioforms, not even shadows in the warp, just silence. The hive mind, vast though it is, feels these absences, like gaps in a memory, and it learns. One theory posits the existence of predatory intelligences, entities that are not gods, not daemons, and not bound by the warp in any recognizable fashion. These would be survivors or relics of a pre-galactic age, creatures not motivated by hunger or conquest, but by territoriality or containment. Not life forms, perhaps, but anti-life. They do not act until provoked, but when the Tyranids breach their domain, they respond with terminal force. The hive mind, not omniscient but highly sensitive, begins to adapt. It registers these threats not as puzzles, but as blots on its map of viable consumption. Think about that. The Tyranids, whose only morality is utility, whose only motive is hunger, choose not to engage. That is not fear as we understand it. It is risk management on a cosmic scale. To the hive mind, these threats are not evil. They are cost. Systems that yield no biomass and return no digestible data are simply not worth the attempt. Better to avoid. Better to reroute. Better to let the shadows keep their secrets. There are rumors among the Eldar that echo this fear. Some Farseers during scrying rituals near these systems report visions of black shapes moving between stars. Not ships, not beasts, forms. They don't register on scanners. They leave no trails. They move in ways that make the heart skip, as if reality itself is reluctant to acknowledge their presence. One Farseer, before descending into a psychic coma, described them as things that should not move but do, things that look back when seen. These are not metaphors. These are warnings. The Necrons, too, may play a role. Some speculate that they have seeded the galaxy with Watchers, constructs built not to fight but to erase. If the Tyranids were ever perceived as a galactic-level threat during the ancient wars, it would be logical for the Necrons to create countermeasures. Not fleets, not warriors, but traps woven into the fabric of space-time. Devices or fields that do not just destroy, they nullify. They make things unhappen. Perhaps what the hive mind fears is not pain, but unmaking. There's also a darker theory that the Tyranids themselves remember something, a trauma buried in their genetic memory. Maybe they were not always the apex predators. Maybe they evolved or were engineered in a galaxy where things even worse than them existed. And when they cross into certain star systems, some buried ancestral code recognizes the threat. A warning flares, not a thought, but a recoil. Like a bird sensing a snake in the grass, even if it's never seen one before. If true, this means the Tyranids are not truly fearless. They are not gods of hunger, but children of something older. Something that still waits in the cold dark between galaxies. Something that watches as the hive fleets crawl across the stars, consuming and learning, and knows that one day it will be time to feed. So when we see those untouched systems, those empty coordinates on the map, we should not feel relief. We should feel dread. Because the only thing that makes the Tyranids hesitate is the certainty of death they cannot comprehend. And in a galaxy ruled by nightmares, the fact that even they turn away should make us ask, what is out there, hunting the hunter? There are regions in the galaxy where even the warp refuses to speak, areas where astropaths go blind, navigators feel nauseous, and the psychic choir of the Imperium becomes a discordant hum of static and pain. These voids, silent, airless, and seemingly empty, are where the hive mind falters, not because it is fought, not because it is deceived, but because it simply cannot be. These are the psychic abysses, the null zones where the great synaptic signal of the Tyranids does not reach. To understand the horror of this, you have to grasp how central the hive mind is to every single Tyranid creature. From the smallest feeder beast to the vast synapse monsters that coordinate planetary invasions, all are just expressions of a single, continent-spanning will. This is not command in the human sense. It's not leadership. It is absolute, total control, a telepathic mesh so dense that individual thought is meaningless. The hive mind doesn't think like we do, it is. But in certain regions of space, that unity collapses. The hive mind enters a kind of cognitive silence, a vacuum where it cannot assert itself. To a creature wholly dependent on the psychic mesh, this is not just disorientation, it is death. Hormagaunts become feral, attacking each other or wandering aimlessly. Lictors curl into themselves, whimpering in atavistic confusion. Even mighty hive tyrants lose coherence and begin to rot, not from external damage, but from the sudden absence of identity. Without the mind, they are just meat. These are not mere accidents. The existence of these dead zones, sometimes called synaptic voids, is documented across multiple encounters. Hive Fleet Naga experienced such a collapse near the ghost systems of the Eastern Fringe. A vast number of bioforms simply ceased functioning after entering the outer boundaries of a sector known only as the Quiet Coil. No survivors, no resistance, just dead space and drifting chitin. Imperial ships that passed through the same area experienced strange phenomena, not warp storms, but the absence of the warp. The Gellar fields remained inert. The navigator's third eyes saw nothing but a void deeper than space. Psychic adepts reported dreams of drowning in tar, of being forgotten by the stars. One inquisitor, driven mad by the journey, scrawled the words, "It is a place without memory," across the walls of his ship's chapel before vanishing. It is possible, even likely, that these zones are naturally occurring phenomena. After all, the immaterium is shaped by thought, by emotion, by the echo of souls. Perhaps there are regions so devoid of psychic resonance that they form voids within the warp itself. Places without history, without pain, without anything. To the hive mind, which feeds on the collective psychic murmur of sentient life, these places are poison. But some theories go further. Some claim these are not natural at all, but designed. That in the distant past, civilizations we cannot name wove the warp into knots, creating psychic black holes to seal away things too terrible to destroy. Imagine a vault not made of metal, but of silence. A lock made from absence. And the Tyranids, with all their power, brush against these ancient mechanisms and recoil, not from fear, but from the impossibility of comprehension. There's also the theory that these zones are side effects of collapsed warp entities. Just as stars collapse into black holes, perhaps there are gods or demigods of the warp that have died, leaving behind scars that consume all thought. To the hive mind, which functions like a nerve cluster across a galaxy-wide body, these are like tumors in the fabric of reality. Contact with them leads to systemic failure. The mind doesn't just lose control, it begins to forget itself. A particularly disturbing report comes from a Deathwatch kill team that tracked a Genestealer cult into one of these voids. What they found was not a battle, not a slaughter, but a suicide. The cult had imploded, literally. Autopsies showed that the hybrids had suffered catastrophic psychic hemorrhage. They hadn't been attacked, they had been disconnected. The echo of the hive mind, so central to their existence, had been turned off. And with it, their minds crumbled. There are even whispers, unverified but persistent, that the Tyranids themselves had begun to evolve avoidance behavior around these zones. That certain bioforms now produce biochemical signals warning of psychic disruption. A kind of learned terror, encoded not through fear, but through chemical aversion. If true, it means the hive mind does not just experience these voids, it remembers them, and it tells its children to stay away. This revelation cracks the myth of Tyranid perfection. It shows that even this ultimate predator has a blind spot, a vulnerability not of flesh, but of soul. These psychic abysses are reminders that there are corners of the galaxy where even hunger dies, where thought cannot follow, where the great roaring scream of consumption turns into a whisper and then into nothing at all. In the end, we must ask ourselves, what do the Tyranids feel in that silence? Not fear, not loss, but something worse. A flicker of something they cannot assimilate, something beyond even their vast biological intellects. A reminder that for all their mastery of matter, there are places where meaning itself collapses. And that is where the hive mind stops. Hive Fleet Morbius was supposed to be a routine splinter, a tendril of the larger Tyranid presence threading its way through the Orpheus sector with chilling efficiency. The Imperium had already marked its approach and begun the usual desperate preparations: planetary evacuations, last stands, fleet redeployments. But Morbius never arrived. It didn't die in battle. It didn't encounter resistance. It simply vanished into a part of the galaxy most Imperial records only mark as a blank curve, the Landvarn Reach, a region of uncertain coordinates and inconsistent sensor returns. What happened there remains one of the most profound mysteries in the Tyrannic Wars. The Hive Fleet's last known trajectory placed it on a direct path through a cluster of systems known as the Mirandi Arc, a constellation of barely habitable rocks, long since stripped of resources by earlier Mechanicus expeditions. There was no strategic value, no significant biomass, nothing that should have warranted a pause. And yet, after entering that region, all contact with Morbius ceased. No bioforms, no spores, no hive ships, just void. At first, the disappearance was hailed as a miracle by local commanders, divine intervention perhaps, a moment of mercy, but the Adeptus Mechanicus thought otherwise. They dispatched discreet exploration fleets, hoping to recover Tyranid debris or data. What they found were echoes, spatial distortions that shouldn't exist, planets with time fractures, where chronometers disagreed with stellar drift by centuries. One ship reported seeing its own arrival before it had jumped into the system. Another returned decades later, its crew aged and insane, their records overwritten by looping sequences of pick captures showing only darkness. There are some who believe the Orpheus Enigma, as it came to be known, is a flaw in real space itself, that the region is not a place, but a phenomenon. A ripple in the galactic disk where time, space, and thought do not obey the rules. Perhaps even a tear in the membrane separating the material from something far worse. The warp may be chaotic, but it is at least predictable in its violence. What happened in the Landvarn Reach is quiet, too quiet. It is the silence of negation, not peace. What made the disappearance of Morbius especially troubling was that the hive mind noticed. Shortly after the splinter's vanishing, adjacent Tyranid tendrils in the Orpheus sector altered course dramatically, withdrawing from systems they had nearly overrun. This was not a tactical retreat. It was panic, on a scale unthinkable for a species designed to consume without hesitation. Synaptic creatures died en masse, as if their link to the hive mind had been corrupted. Mycetic spores detonated in midair. Even dormant genistellar cults on fringe worlds began to dissolve into psychosis, their communion with the stars abruptly cut off. Some inquisitors believe the hive mind experienced something like trauma. Not a wound, but a recognition of something beyond its power. Whatever happened in that sector was not merely destructive, it was incompatible, an infection of unlogic, and the hive mind, impossibly vast and ancient though it is, recognized it and recoiled. The tech priests who examined the systems post-event noted impossible radiation patterns, planets whose orbits defied gravity, asteroids frozen in motion. But most disturbing were the psychic traces. Voxcasters recorded whispers long after power was cut. Astropaths refused to enter the sector mentally, claiming it had become psychically opaque. One described it as trying to look into a mirror that no longer reflects. Another, moments before she died, simply said, "It is the place where the stars lie." There are more esoteric theories, of course. That the region was a prison and Hive Fleet Morbius opened the door. That Morbius didn't vanish, it became part of something else. That the Tyranids, driven by hunger, stumbled into a consciousness older than the galaxy, and were unmade not through battle, but through assimilation in reverse. If the hive mind is the collective will of a species, what happens when it touches a greater will, one with no interest in life at all? Even the Eldar are silent on the matter. A few Craftworld seers have alluded to the Reach in cryptic warnings, calling it the wound that watches. The Necrons, too, have tombs nearby, but none that have awakened, as if their slumber must not be disturbed. Perhaps they, too, know what waits there. Or perhaps they built the silence as a barrier, hoping to seal away whatever presence lingers in the dark. What remains of Hive Fleet Morbius may still exist, not as a fleet, but as echoes. Bioforms trapped in looping causality. Synapse creatures flickering in and out of time, a song with no source, still humming in the void. The Orpheus Enigma is not just a story of Tyranid failure, it is a warning that even the Great Devourer, in all its fury and purpose, has limits. And sometimes the stars themselves are the predator. To this day, no hive fleet has entered the Landvarn Reach again. The map shows it as empty, a curve of space between wars, between horrors. But we know better. It is not empty. It is full of whatever the hive mind cannot understand. The idea that the Necrons could be responsible for the Tyranids' strange avoidance patterns is not just compelling, it's disturbingly plausible. These ancient star-faring undead are not passive relics of a forgotten age. They are architects of silence, masters of suppression, and custodians of a reality so ordered, so antithetical to biological chaos, that even the hive mind itself may recognize them as an existential threat. In many ways, the Necrons represent everything the Tyranids are not, and that opposition may be precisely why the Tyranids turn away. The theory centers around the concept of psychic nullification. The Necrons are infamous for their ability to dampen, distort, or outright cancel warp energies. Their anti-warp technologies, pariahs, null fields, and reality anchors, are ancient, sophisticated, and brutally effective. These aren't just weapons against daemons or psychers. They are weapons against connection, against any organism that depends on psychic cohesion to function. And the Tyranids, whose entire being is built upon the unity of the hive mind, are especially vulnerable to such fields. Imagine a planet seeded with Necron pylons, not as weapons, but as beacons of negation. From orbit, the hive mind senses only static. No biomass signatures, no psychic signals, just void. And when its scouts enter the system, the synaptic link begins to degrade. Bioforms lose coherence, instinct overrides purpose, feral madness blooms followed by decay. To the hive mind, such places are dead zones, but worse than natural nulls. These are deliberate, shaped. There's mounting circumstantial evidence for this theory. In several instances, systems bypassed by the Tyranids were later found to contain dormant or semi-active Necron tombs. Not awakened armies, not monoliths on the march, just the quiet hum of ancient machinery still performing unknown functions. In these places, Mechanicus surveyors report elevated levels of psionic suppression. Even human psychers feel the dulling presence long before landing. One described it as breathing concrete. What if these tombs were not only burial sites, but defensive grids? Not against us, but against something the Necrons foresaw? The War in Heaven, that cataclysmic pre-galactic conflict between Necron and Old Ones, left scars deeper than time. The Necrons witnessed what happens when life evolves unchecked, when psychic potential blooms too brightly. They understand, perhaps better than any other race, the cost of letting organic species run wild. The Tyranids may simply be the latest iteration of that problem, a threat that was anticipated before the stars cooled. And so, some theorize the Necrons seeded the galaxy with deterrents, zones of denial, anti-organic fences made not of steel, but of psychic entropy. It's a horrifyingly clinical strategy. Let the rest of the galaxy burn, but protect key systems with nullification. Keep the swarm at bay not with fleets, but with absence. Make the psychic landscape so barren that even the hive mind, insatiable though it is, decides to turn elsewhere. More disturbingly, some speculate that the Necrons have also learned how to exploit the hive mind itself, that they can, in rare cases, project false signals, lures designed to disrupt or reroute Tyranid tendrils. Imagine a synthetic pulse, engineered to mimic the presence of abundant biomass or strong synaptic resonance, drawing the swarm into a trap where it will starve or fracture. We have no confirmed instances of this, but the sudden death of certain tendrils and the inexplicable convergence of others into barren regions suggests manipulation on a scale we are not yet equipped to understand. There are even darker theories. That some Necron dynasties, particularly those of the Nihilak and Thukkokt, known for their preservationist doctrines, have begun actively weeding the galaxy. Not with brute force, but by manipulating the migratory patterns of the Tyranids through psychic landscaping. These tomb worlds would then serve as both beacons and warnings, like signposts written in a language of instinct and pain. To the hive mind, they scream one message: go no further. The question then arises, are the Necrons trying to protect themselves? Or the galaxy? Or are these quarantines not walls but cages? Perhaps they're not repelling the Tyranids entirely, but guiding them, herding the swarm through safe corridors while keeping sacred or strategic systems untouched. If so, we are not watching a war, but a cattle drive, a cosmic manipulation where we are merely collateral. Of course, none of this is officially confirmed. The Necrons do not explain themselves. Their silence is as immutable as their metal flesh. And yet, when we look at the maps, the patterns of Tyranid avoidance, the clusters of dead systems, the eerie regularity of bypassed tomb worlds, the conclusion becomes difficult to ignore. Something is bending the Great Devourer's path, something the Tyranids cannot consume. Something so fundamentally antithetical to their purpose that they recoil on an instinctual level. And if the Necrons are truly responsible, then the war for the galaxy is even more complex than we feared. Because in that case, the Tyranids are not just a threat, they are a test. And someone very old is watching to see if we pass. Among the many enigmatic races that have shaped the fate of the galaxy, the Eldari stand apart, not because of their power, which has waned, or their numbers, which are few, but because of their capacity to wound from afar. The Eldari do not fight like humans or even Tyranids. They fight through fate, through illusion, through perfectly set traps that spring not today, but millennia later. When we speak of Tyranids avoiding systems, some whisper that it is not fear, or reason, or even the Necrons that turns them back, but the Eldari and their mastery of psychic pain. Across the craft worlds and exodite worlds, there are prophecies and rituals older than the fall, older even than the war in heaven. The Farseers speak in riddles, in poems drawn from the threads of time. They do not act randomly. Every step, every manipulation, every death, calculated. Now imagine such a people deciding not to fight the Tyranids, but to poison the stars themselves against them. The theory goes like this. The Eldari, knowing that they could not confront the hive fleets in open war, began planting psychic traps throughout the galaxy. These are not devices or machines, but distortions, wounds in the psychic fabric, seeded with pain so profound that even the hive mind flinches. These systems appear unremarkable. No visible defenses, sometimes even colonized by humans or orcs thriving briefly. But when the Tyranids approach, something changes. The synaptic link frays. Organisms convulse. The swarm recoils not from firepower but from a memory that isn't theirs. Because these traps do not kill, they reflect. They force the Tyranids, creatures of perfect biological purpose, to confront sensations they cannot process: sorrow, despair, futility. Emotions meaningless to them, and yet capable of unraveling the hive mind's cohesion in an instant. The Eldar do not need to understand Tyranid biology. They understand their soul, or the lack of it, and they've learned how to twist that void into agony. In ancient times before the fall, the Eldari maintained entire moon temples devoted to the unweaving. These were places where psychic energy was pulled apart and reknit into patterns that only a Farseer could comprehend. According to some radical human scholars, these temples still exist, hidden on dead worlds or deep within the webway, and they form the anchor points for a galactic net of psychic distortion. A net not meant for demons, but for minds. What if some of the systems the Tyranids avoid are directly beneath this net? Places where the psychic harmonics resonate at just the right frequency to cause disarray? Not destruction, disintegration of purpose. The hive mind, sensing only error, pulls back, not because it is afraid, but because it is confused. And confusion, for a species whose unity is its lifeblood, is the first step toward annihilation. Even more compelling are reports from scattered Eldari enclaves that speak of Cain's tears, phenomena where the warp itself bleeds sorrow into real space. These tears, when seeded properly, can cause mass hallucinations, synaptic collapse, and even localized psychic comas in non-Eldar minds. Tyranids especially seem to be affected in unpredictable ways. Warriors go feral, bioships lose course, broodlords vanish into the shadows of their own minds. The Farseers deny nothing, they speak only in symbols. One famously told a Death Watch kill team, "You speak of beasts, but not of what wounds them. We do not fear the devourer, we teach it to taste regret." That phrase, taste regret, has been repeated in inquisitorial circles ever since. Because if it's true, if the Eldari have found a way to force an emotionless predator to feel, then we are dealing with a weapon not of war, but of metaphysical sabotage. There is also speculation that the Eldari have seeded false signals, psychic illusions so intricate they appear as real worlds to the hive mind. These illusions bait the Tyranids into attacking ghosts. They waste resources, energy, biomass, only to find nothing. Or worse, find themselves caught in a recursive psychic echo, trapped in loops of thought not their own. Some claim entire splinter fleets have been consumed by these phantasms, spiraling into nothingness. None of this is confirmed, of course. The Eldari do not confess, they do not leave signs. Their victories are written in silence and shadow. But the patterns remain. Systems bypassed without cause. Hive fleets disrupted without force. Places that glow faintly to human psychers, like half-heard sobs in the dark. And always, just beyond the veil, the whisper of a craft world passing unseen. To the Imperium, this is heresy, trusting Xenos, believing in ghosts. But to those who have studied the Great Devourer, it is not just possible, it is necessary, because it means the Tyranids can be broken, not with bolters, not with torpedoes, but with sorrow, with memory, with pain. And no one knows pain like the Eldari. There's a theory, a whispered one mostly, shared between radical Xeno scholars and fringe inquisitors, that the Tyranids are not entirely alien in their reactions. That despite their alien biology, despite their lack of emotion or culture or individuality, there lies within them something disturbingly familiar, the capacity to remember. Not in the conscious sense, not with stories or symbols, but something deeper, genetic memory. A biological echo passed down through countless generations, encoded into flesh, whispering warnings that have no language. This is the theory of ancestral pain. The hive mind is not a soul. It is not even a consciousness in the human sense, but it is memory. It is experience, accumulated across an unfathomable span of time and distance. Every Tyranid creature, from the smallest feeder to the greatest synapse beast, carries within it a sliver of that accumulated data. When a lictor stalks its prey, it moves not just with instinct, but with the lessons of 1,000 hunts encoded in its nervous system. When a hive ship decides to approach a system, it does so with the weight of countless past engagements informing its course. So what if some of those memories are warnings? What if, somewhere in the vast and alien history of the Tyranids, they encountered something that hurt them? Something that broke the hive mind, if only for a moment. Something so traumatic, so fundamentally incompatible with their existence, that the memory of it became embedded in their code. Not a story, a reflex, a recoil. It is not impossible. Even on Terra, animals display instinctual fear of predators they've never seen. A mouse will flee the shadow of a hawk even if it's been bred in captivity for generations. What if the Tyranids, the apex predators of this galaxy, are reacting to something older? Some long-lost predator they met in the abyss between galaxies, or even in a galaxy before this one. There are moments that support this theory. Systems where no Necron presence exists, no psychic nulls, no detectable warp anomalies. And yet the Tyranids turn away. Systems where their own vanguard organisms land, scout, begin the infestation process, only to retreat. Not driven off, not destroyed. They choose to leave. They discard the biomass, they abandon their cults. It is the equivalent of a starving animal walking away from a meal it's already sunk its teeth into. Why? Because somewhere in that meat, in the air, in the psychic pulse of that world, is a signal, a scent, a shape. Something the hive mind recognizes not as prey or threat, but as something else entirely, pain remembered. Perhaps it's a kind of neural echo, something that triggers that ancient preconscious warning, a bioelectric signature, a pattern in the stars, even a song if one can imagine such a thing. A frequency that vibrates against the chitinous bones of a bioship and says, without words, here lies death. And so the hive mind pulls back. To us this would be emotion. To them it is survival. There is a tragic implication in all of this, that the Tyranids, for all their monstrosity, are not immune to fear. Not in the way humans are, not with thoughts or anticipation, but in a primal way. Like touching fire and remembering the burn. Like gazing upon a silhouette and knowing death walks within it. Perhaps the hive mind itself has boundaries. Perhaps its creators, if such beings existed, failed to purge all vulnerability from the swarm. Or perhaps this is evolution in action, a survival mechanism born from an encounter with something too great, too wrong to be understood. Some have speculated that this ancestral pain comes from a war the Tyranids lost. Not here, not in our galaxy, but before. In another corner of the cosmos, a war against beings that were never biological, never physical. Beings of entropy, of anti-thought. Not daemons, not gods, but predators of minds. Others wonder if it is self-inflicted. That somewhere, deep in their own genetic code, the Tyranids carry the memory of what they once were, before the hive mind, before the consumption. And that in certain places, that memory stirs, disrupting the signal with a flicker of autonomy. A faint, impossible whisper of what they gave up to become what they are now. Whatever the source, it remains a mystery the Imperium cannot replicate. We cannot weaponize it. We do not understand it. All we know is that it happens, that there are stars the Tyranids will not cross, not because they cannot, but because something in their bones says no. And if the most perfect killers in the galaxy can be made to stop, not by force but by memory, then the question must be asked, what horror lies at the root of that memory? What scar stretches across the DNA of the devourer? And more importantly, will we ever see what made the hive mind afraid? There's a darker possibility, one that inverts the entire discussion. What if the Tyranids are not being repelled by fearsome powers or ancient enemies, but by illusions? What if they are being lured away, tricked into thinking there is no prey, no biomass, no signal worth consuming? In this view, the systems the hive fleets refuse to enter aren't dangerous. They're decoys, traps, camouflaged zones of misdirection seeded by someone or something with a terrifying understanding of how the hive mind thinks. To appreciate this idea, you have to imagine how the Tyranids perceive the galaxy. They don't see it in light or color or beauty. They see it in biomass, in psychic pressure, in food potential. Planets are nothing more than fuel stations to the hive mind, evaluated for their usefulness and then consumed accordingly. If that evaluation is corrupted, if the signals are manipulated, then the entire process becomes vulnerable. And that is the crux of this theory, that someone somewhere has learned to falsify the signals the hive mind depends on. Imagine a world with 10 billion people, teeming with life, its psychic signature a beacon in the warp, but covered in a shroud. A veil of psychic suppression so subtle, so nuanced, that to the hive mind it appears barren, lifeless, worthless. The fleet passes by, never realizing what it has missed. Meanwhile, the defenders remain hidden, unassaulted, unnoticed. This wouldn't just be a defensive measure, it would be a victory won without a single shot fired. There is evidence to suggest this might be happening. The Ordo Xenos has compiled reports of worlds that were bypassed entirely, despite having clear signs of genestealer infestation. Entire cults left to rot, screaming into the void for a fleet that never came. Psychic beacons functioning, biomass abundant, and yet, no Tyranids. As if the hive mind had been convinced that the prey was already devoured. The Eldari could be behind it. Their psychic finesse is legendary, and they have no qualms about subtlety when it comes to survival. But there are other contenders. The Imperium itself may be experimenting with such techniques. Radical inquisitors, tech adepts bordering on heresy, even rogue navigators, all could be capable of developing lures or illusions designed to fool the hive mind's instincts. Then there's the possibility of ancient human technology, left behind from the dark age of technology. Devices that emit false psychic signals. Machines that mimic the presence of hive mind synapse creatures or mask entire worlds with a psychic deadening field. Some believe the Sisters of Silence possess remnants of such tech. Others think it lies buried in the black archives beneath Terra, waiting to be rediscovered. Even the Necrons might be involved, not just through nullification, but through manipulation. Imagine Necron pylons that don't just cancel psychic presence, but redirect it. Imagine they could project illusions of lifeless systems across entire sectors, nudging Tyranid fleets away with a map that doesn't match reality. A kind of psychic mirage. And what if some of these dead systems are more than mere avoidance points? What if they are bait? A world that appears ripe for the taking, its defenses seemingly minimal, its biomass rich. The Tyranids descend. But something is wrong. The signal was false. The biomass is tainted, infected, laced with neurotoxins or psychic disruptions designed to shatter the hive mind's control. Maybe it's a trap laid by an ancient enemy. Maybe it's an experiment, a galactic snare waiting for the predator to step inside. We may never know how many Tyranid fleets have been lost this way. Not in glorious battle, but in silence. Lured into systems that were never real, consumed by illusions too perfect to resist. These are not battlegrounds. They are feeding traps. Not for the swarm, but for those who would study its reactions, test its limits, and perhaps learn how to control it. Because if the hive mind can be fooled, it can be predicted. And if it can be predicted, it can be manipulated. The implications are staggering. Perhaps the reason the hive fleets avoid certain systems is not fear or memory, but deception. Perhaps there are wars being waged in layers of thought and illusion we cannot perceive. Wars where the weapons are signals, where the battlefield is the mind of the devourer itself. And if this is true, then somewhere out there is an intelligence playing a game we barely understand, not trying to defeat the Tyranids, but to guide them, to steer their hunger. Toward what end, none can say. But the stars the Tyranids avoid might not be sanctuaries, they might be illusions. Perfectly crafted lies, and we're left to wonder, who built them, and what are they hiding? In the deepest vaults of the ecclesiarchy, amid blood-washed reliquaries and scrolls too holy to be spoken aloud, there are fragments of a story. Not doctrine, not dogma, but something stranger. Tales of systems where the Tyranids do not go, not because they are blocked or baited, but because they are blessed. These are worlds where the air sings with residual sanctity, where martyrdom has stained the soil so deeply that even the hive mind hesitates. They are called the Emperor's last gifts, and they are places where death was so complete, so faithful, that it burned a scar into the warp. This theory is considered heretical in many circles. To claim that the Emperor's power manifests directly in the material galaxy, that it can affect the decisions of a Xenos race like the Tyranids, challenges the structured dogma of the Imperium. But the stories persist. Worlds where the swarm turned away for no reason. Worlds where the only defense was a cathedral or a saint's bones. Worlds where nothing lived, yet the hive mind fled as though repelled by a blinding light. Consider the case of Saint Leish's Remembrance, a death world devoid of industry, military, or strategic value. When Hive Fleet Leviathan's splinter tendril approached it, Imperial High Command assumed it would be devoured within days. The world had no defense grid, no fleet, just a handful of monasteries and a single functioning shrine, built upon the site where Saint Leisha is said to have bled for 7 days before death. The swarm arrived, and then stopped. Not a single spore touched the ground. The bioships hovered for less than a day and retreated. Nearby systems were consumed without hesitation. But that one planet, untouched. No explanation has ever sufficed. Some claim the psychic signal of the saint, perhaps reinforced by faith and martyrdom, created a beacon of such intensity that it disrupted synaptic cohesion. Others say the hive mind sensed something it could not devour, an immaterial resonance that was not life, but something adjacent to it, something that resisted consumption not through strength but through presence. If this is true, then it speaks to a horrifying inversion of the hive mind's nature. The Tyranids are perfect predators, yes, but only of flesh, of organic biomass. They are indifferent to concepts, to thoughts, to symbols. Yet faith, when strong enough, does seem to have weight in the warp. Saints, martyrs, even relics, they radiate something. And perhaps that something is not just metaphorical. Perhaps it creates a pressure, a kind of resonance that interferes with the hive mind's song. Could it be that certain acts of sacrifice leave a stain so bright it blinds the predator? Another example, the dead moon of Aloria. A mining station turned battlefield where the Sisters of Battle held out against overwhelming odds, praying even as their bodies burned. Their last act was not to win, but to refuse to surrender. The last Voxcast was a litany of hate against the Xenos and love for the Emperor. When the Tyranids arrived, they found nothing but scorched ruins. Yet they did not land. They orbited for weeks, then left. Not because there was nothing to consume, but because something in that place screamed denial. This theory implies that the Tyranids are not invincible, not because of weakness in their bodies, but in their perception. That they evaluate the galaxy through psychic scent, and that faith, true faith, smells wrong to them. It is not fear, it is not biomass. It is resistance made manifest in ways they cannot parse. And rather than try, they turn away. There are those who believe the Emperor himself plays a role in this, that his light, even flickering, even wounded, still reaches into places of true devotion. Not to save lives, but to protect meaning. These gifted systems are never chosen randomly. They are places where people died with purpose, where sacrifice was not a strategy, but an offering. And in doing so, those deaths created something eternal, a kind of psychic monument the Tyranids cannot climb. The ecclesiarchy has begun, quietly, to test this. Some shrines are being reinforced, not with guns, but with faith. Relics are moved to worlds in the path of the swarm. Choirs of sanctioned psychers sing litanies of purity night and day, attempting to raise a signal strong enough to cast doubt into the hive mind's cold perfection. It is not science, it is not certainty, but it is hope. Because if faith can repel the Tyranids, even once, then it becomes the most powerful weapon in the Imperium's arsenal. Not bolters, not ships, belief. The kind that burns through death, through void, through fear. And maybe, just maybe, that is the one thing the hive mind cannot understand. Not because it is illogical, but because it is not food. It cannot be digested, it cannot be adapted. It is pure resistance, will without self, purpose beyond survival. The Tyranids are not afraid of the Emperor, but they might be afraid of what he leaves behind. There's a region of space that even the Inquisition struggles to name, not because it is unknown, but because it changes. The charts mark it one way, the warp maps another. Navigators feel the tides pull differently each time they cross it, and sometimes they don't return at all. This is not just a warp storm or a temporal rift. This is something else, something crafted. And some among the Ordo Malleus have begun whispering the same heretical phrase, the domain of the great deceiver. Tzeentch, the changer of ways, does not conquer like Khorne, corrupt like Nurgle, or seduce like Slaanesh. He rewrites. He moves before you do, thinks before you plan. And it is precisely this nature that makes his touch the ultimate nightmare for the Tyranids. Because the hive mind is not just a creature of hunger. It is a system, a chain of logic and perception that depends on coherence. And Tzeentch does not allow coherence. He replaces it with contradiction, with recursion, with lies so perfect they become reality. There are systems where Tyranid fleets vanish without a trace, not in combat, not in retreat, but in unfolding. Reports from nearby astropaths speak of psychic fields where the swarm's movements become erratic. Mycetic spores land before the fleet arrives. Hormagaunts birth themselves into non-existence. Time splits. Bioforms mutate spontaneously, not into new species but into ideas. Incomprehensible, twitching amalgamations of teeth, symbols, and sound. To the hive mind, which requires absolute control, this is annihilation. Not destruction of the body, but of the signal. In one such region, designated Gaius Delta Null, an entire splinter fleet of Hive Fleet Kraken entered what appeared to be a normal, albeit lightly populated, Imperial sector. Imperial observers tracked the approach. Cults began rising, vanguard organisms were sighted, but then the warp shifted. The fleet passed behind a gas giant and was never seen again. No battle, no wreckage. Only a strange echoing hum, audible across multiple Vox channels, repeating a phrase in a tongue no human linguist could decipher. A phrase that, when played backward, matched the psychic liturgies of the Thousand Suns. The Adeptus Mechanicus, desperate for answers, launched probes into the zone. What returned were data fragments too corrupted to parse. Visuals showed impossible architecture, bioships folded into spirals, spores drifting upward into nothing, lictors stalking prey made of light. One Magos watching the footage screamed for 7 hours before dying of massive synaptic overload. Her final words, "It thinks in futures." The idea that Tzeentch, or a force like him, has laid temporal mines throughout the galaxy is terrifying. These would be zones where time loops, inverts, or fractures, where the Tyranids' perfect predictive behavior collapses. Bioforms evolve too fast, mutating into unusable configurations. Synaptic feedback becomes recursive, causing paroxysms of thought that drown the local hive node. Essentially, the Tyranids self-destruct, not because they're outmatched, but because the rules change. And the hive mind cannot adapt to what it cannot map. Some radicals in the Ordo Malleus believe these zones are not accidents, but tests. Tzeentch, always hungry for knowledge, may see the Tyranids not as a threat, but as a tool, a living experiment to understand the limits of biological determinism. Perhaps he seeds these systems with paradoxes, watches how the swarm reacts, and learns, not because he wishes to defeat them, but because he wants to use them. To infect the hive mind with contradiction, to force it to rewrite itself. But others, particularly the more devout, believe these regions are not laboratories but prisons, that they are snares designed specifically to unmake the hive mind. Tzeentch does not fear the Tyranids as one fears an enemy. He fears them as a master fears a weapon that might cut too well. So he traps them where they are most vulnerable, not in the warp, not in matter, but in possibility. In this theory, the hive fleets avoid certain systems because they have learned what happens when they don't. Not from logic, not from survival, but from trauma. These systems aren't memory, they are infection. And when the Tyranids taste the unreality within them, they recoil in instinctual horror. Not because they recognize Tzeentch, but because they recognize what he does. The hive mind is vast, yes, but it is finite. It needs linearity. It needs direction. Tzeentch offers only chaos, and so the Tyranids turn away. Because even the Great Devourer must admit, some meals are poison. And in the domain of the Great Deceiver, where time burns and thoughts bleed, the Tyranids find not prey, but dissolution. Deep beneath the surface of imperial understanding, in the black vaults of the Ordo Xenos, lies the gravest suspicion of all, that the Imperium itself may be shaping the hive fleet's path. Not through force, not through resistance, but through deception and sacrifice. There is growing evidence that entire systems avoided by the Tyranids are not sanctified zones, nor cursed traps, nor ancient anomalies, but meticulously engineered blanks. Silent, hollow planets created by design, by us. The theory is horrific. It suggests that the High Lords, or more likely factions within the Inquisition, have been deploying weapons or strategies so secret that not even the Segmentum commands are aware. Systems rendered null, not through orbital defenses or psychic sanctification, but by removing all signal. Dead systems where entire populations have been wiped clean to create a psychic vacuum. This is not battlefield desperation. It is preemptive genocide. The ultimate sacrifice, sterilizing a system to create a void so profound the hive mind senses nothing and passes it by. Not because it fears what is there, but because it believes nothing is. There are whispers of Project Spectre, an alleged inquisitorial protocol where select worlds, judged indefensible, are repurposed into decoy voids. The process begins with astropathic isolation. No signals in or out. The planetary population is moved, purged, or simply left to die. Then begins the nullification. Orbital bombardment, not to destroy, but to erase. Psychic purifiers are detonated. Blanks are deployed in regiments to suppress warp resonance. In some cases, Culexus assassins are said to be stationed in planetary cores, their null auras magnified through arcane machines. When the hive mind brushes these systems, it finds only silence. No biomass, no signal, not even a whisper of life. It turns away. The ethical implications are staggering. Billions sacrificed, entire cultures erased, and for what? To divert a fleet, to protect more valuable systems. But it may go even deeper. Some believe these systems are not just diversions. They are messages. Crafted silences, designed to speak to the hive mind in its own language. Think about that. The Inquisition, or a faction within it, has studied the Tyranids so closely, dissected their behavior so thoroughly, that it has begun to speak back. Not with words, not with weapons, but with shapes in void, with calculated absence. There's even evidence, subtle, fragmented, that these tactics work. Highfleet Jormungandr, famous for its subterranean invasions and ambush behavior, showed signs of confusion when encountering these ghost systems. Its tendrils broke apart. Advance units were deployed late or never landed at all. Bioships orbited without action, then retreated. Whatever they sensed or failed to sense disrupted their programming. And there is one final horror. What if some of these zones are not merely erased, but armed? What if, inside some of these dead systems, lie weapons too dangerous to use openly? Devices capable of disrupting the hive mind directly, not through combat, but through feedback? Echo weapons, psychic reflectors, coded signals that jam the synaptic network? Things so dangerous that the Imperium does not dare fire them, only leave them where the swarm might find them and die. These would be the ultimate traps. Systems made barren not by loss, but by calculation. Not because the Tyranids cannot breach them, but because they shouldn't. Because if they do, they will be unmade. And if this is true, then it means something even more terrifying, that the war against the Tyranids is not just military. It is informational, psychological, strategic on a scale so vast it dwarfs human comprehension. It means the Imperium has begun to understand the hive mind as a mind, and is fighting back inside its thoughts. And it also means this: every system the Tyranids avoid may have been sacrificed by our own hands. And the silence we celebrate may be the scream we never heard. There's a limit even to perfection. That's the final truth hiding in the systems the Tyranids won't enter. Not a mystery of Xeno's origin or divine protection, but a biological boundary. A line in the stars that marks the edge of what the hive mind can understand, or tolerate, or become. Because the ultimate horror may not be what the Tyranids avoid. But why? It's not fear. It's not strategy. It's something deeper. Something that strikes at the core of their existence. Something that threatens to unmake their very nature. Evolution has carried them far. They are hunger honed to a razor's edge, each new fleet more refined, each bioform more adapted. But even evolution has a cost. Complexity leads to instability. And there are places in the galaxy where that complexity collapses. Places where the hive mind's vision goes dark. Not because it's blinded, but because it sees itself and recoils. Maybe it's not a predator that waits in those systems. Maybe it's a mirror. The hive mind is a consciousness, but it is also a feedback loop, an endless song of self, sung by trillions of mouths across the stars. But if the signal reflects, if it loops back imperfectly, then it begins to distort. This is what some Xeno scholars believe happens in the forbidden systems. The hive mind overhears itself. It drowns in its own echo. Synaptic control falters. Bioforms begin to move erratically. Warrior organisms turn on each other. Evolution stutters. We have seen it in the few cases where the Tyranids did try to enter these zones. Strange mutations. Bioforms no longer useful. Organisms that reproduce without cause or cease function altogether. The perfect logic of the swarm devolves into chaos. Not the chaos of the warp, but internal biological collapse. A breakdown not of body, but of purpose. The hive mind learns, always. But what if some lessons are poison? What if the systems it avoids are those where it encountered limits? Not resistance, not opposition, but philosophical extinction. Places that show it what it cannot become, what it can never consume. Not because of faith or weapons or ancient traps, but because some truths cannot be digested. Some realities cannot be processed by a mind made only to consume. Maybe these systems are filled with dead gods. Maybe they're places where other hive minds once bloomed and failed. Maybe they're where the Tyranids saw what comes next. There is a theory, a terrifying one, that the Tyranids are not the end of evolution, but merely a step, a larval stage, and that these systems they avoid are warnings left by whatever survived the next phase. Some suggest it's a race of machines, others believe it's an intelligence without form. Or perhaps it is entropy itself, a consciousness of unbecoming that erases not life but process. And the hive mind, for all its hunger, chooses not to face it, because the Tyranids do not fear death, they do not know death, but they may fear change. True change. Not adaptation, but transformation into something no longer recognizable. No longer Tyranid. That is the one thing they cannot afford. Because in becoming something else they lose the song, the hive mind dies, so they turn away. Again and again. The great devourer can consume suns, can crack planets, can dissolve whole species into sludge and turn it into new life. But it cannot face its own extinction. Not as destruction, but as irrelevance, as the end of the evolutionary line. Not a predator defeated, but a god surpassed. And that is the final horror, that the Tyranids, the galaxy's most perfect expression of consumption, know this truth, that there are places in the stars where their logic ends, where evolution doesn't lead to dominance, but to silence. And if they can feel fear, real fear, it is not of war. It is of what comes after. If you made it this far, you're part of the few who stare into the void of Warhammer lore and keep asking questions. If you want more explorations into the strangest corners of the 41st millennium, subscribe now, because sometimes the darkest stories are the ones the Tyranids leave untold.